brotherhood, multiplication, restoration. We are Sin Network. We're a family, planting churches together. Join us as we hear from leaders of this movement from across North America and discover what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone. I am here with Matt Lawson live on location at the Sin Network gathering in the West here in Phoenix, Arizona. Matt Lawson is lead pastor of City Church?
Story City Church.
Story City Church. I knew it. I was close.
You were close.
I was close.
A lot of city churches
now.
There
is. They really are. But man, just go back. We were just talking about just like being in Atlanta and just connecting. Are you from Atlanta?
We claim Atlanta. We claim Atlanta's home. But we were there for 9 years, North Atlanta. Love it, miss it. Great culture. We just love it.
So how long have you been in LA?
So we moved to LA January 2015. So we just passed 5 years that we've been on site there and planting a church in the city. And been 5 years now.
5 years. And did you have a team to go out there? Was it just you and your wife? I mean, how did that all kick off?
It's funny. We had probably 15, 16 people that had committed from Atlanta to go with us. Mm-hmm. Every one of them got picked off from finances, health, family stuff going on. So we moved, as well as a couple that's still on our staff with us. So there were 2 couples that moved out to Atlanta together, moved in the same day.
Yeah. So you started off with 15 strong and it got down to about 4?
Oh, well, there were 15 in Atlanta. We moved to LA with 2 couples and our kids.
Man.
So 3 kids, they had 1 kid. There were 9 of us.
Yeah.
And that's how we started. We didn't know anybody in LA when we moved there.
Okay.
We didn't know a single person. We'd only been in LA 3 days in our life before we moved to LA.
All right. Well, in that, a lot of times, guys are going in, especially a place like Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The money runs out, the patience, all those different things. But I've heard you're the guru when it comes to raising money. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how do you raise money? What is foundationally, what is the thought about raising money?
Yeah, I don't know if I like that title, but I love talking about money. I think oftentimes when I talk to church planners, I think fundraising is the part of the process that seems to be the most unnatural. Mm-hmm. I think church planners struggle with raising funds. I don't think it's a natural ability for most guys. I think it's an acquired skill. Yeah. It's an acquired taste, if you will. And so it's a part of the process, though, that's essential.
Yeah.
Money can't guarantee your church is going to do well. Money can't replace the supernatural call of God on your life. Money can't solve all of your church's issues, but money can fund the vision.
Yeah.
Money can fund the mission of your church, and so fundraising is important. And of all the things that I see a lot of guys struggling with, one of the things that's most prominent is the issue of money and finances and having the ability to fund ministry and to fund mission.
What do you call it? You say you don't like the title earlier. What do you call it? Because I usually call it ministry partnership.
Oh, no, I was talking about the title that you gave me, Fundraising Guru.
No, Fundraising Guru.
I don't think I like being known as that.
You don't like being known as that. I was wondering. I was just like,
No,
but I think, and I love the way you started, just more about kind of the passion, right? It doesn't replace your call. It doesn't guarantee success. No. All of those things. But it can fund the vision, right?
Right.
And I think that's a great distinction. I know a lot of guys come to you and ask you, hey, Matt, teach me about how to raise money. And they want the how. Give me the practical. Yeah. But you were talking about what are things that they need to kind of first establish before getting into some of the practical things?
Yeah, I think there's some elemental things about fundraising that I think probably need to be foundational to establish the house before you just try to jump in and understand the practicals and the how-tos and the best practices of fundraising. And I think when it comes to fundraising, I think our ability to raise fund is typically dependent on 2 legs. And the 2 legs are credibility. Mm-hmm. And I define credibility as the known, observable history of leading, multiplying ministry with a voice that can confirm it. That's how I define credibility. Okay. And then the second leg is vision. I define vision in terms of church planning and specifically fundraising as the ability to assess the missionary context and then being able to put clear, actionable steps to reaching that context. And so that's how I define those two. And so I believe those are the two fundamental legs of raising funds in the church planting context. Credibility, oftentimes when you're in front of a donor and they're asking questions, the questions they typically ask when it relates to credibility: have you led multiplying ministry before? They may not ask it exactly like that, but they're wondering that. Have you cast vision in such a way where people have got behind it and supported it? And so credibility is an essential piece to it, and the vision piece is also essential. But there's a part of this process where maybe guys are starting out in church planting. Maybe it's their first ministry. Maybe they've not done, I was in youth ministry for 14 years. Years ago, youth ministry was sort of the platform that launched you to church planting. Today, I think we're seeing in seminaries, most of the guys are going directly to church planting. So a lot of guys, this is their first ministry content. They've never raised funds before. And so they don't have credibility. They don't have a past history of multiplying ministry. And so I do hear from guys often that say, hey man, this is my first run. So what do I do about credibility? And oftentimes I'll say, well, I believe in fundraising. We can borrow credibility. We can't borrow vision. Vision is to be specific to our context, but we can borrow credibility. And oftentimes when we borrow credibility, what that means is there's a gatekeeper. Gatekeepers are people that speak and people listen. And we can borrow their credibility. And when we don't have a past history of multiplying ministry, basically people are putting their yes down, not on our past, but they're putting their yes down on our potential. And oftentimes when we don't have credibility, the gatekeeper is the one who will open the door to fundraising opportunities when it comes to credibility.
So what does that look like? This guy, you mentioned a seminary guy, a guy that has felt the call to go to a city, to start a church. What does it look like to borrow that credibility in a way that is, is it getting them to come down and cast vision? Is it just kind of name dropping? What does the borrowed credibility look like?
Yeah, I think it can look like several different things. I think ultimately you want to get to a place where you're not only borrowing their recommendation, if you will, and that can come in the form of a lot of different things. Hey, I've got a guy who's raising funds, you should talk to him. Hey, they write a letter on your behalf, they write a recommendation letter on your behalf. But ultimately, you want to get to the place where those people who do have credibility are raising funds for you.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I mean by that is oftentimes when people see the potential and they understand the vision, they understand the possibility, oftentimes in fundraising, you'll find that those gatekeepers are actually also raising funds for you. And ultimately, that's the place where you really want to get to. But when in terms of borrowing credibility, for us, it just came in the form of, hey, pastor, our pastor's from Atlanta. Hey, pastor, can you write a letter? We're sending letters out to 500 churches. We just, we know a lot of these guys, but a lot we don't. But we know they know you. Could you help us open the door to a conversation? Yeah. That was important to us.
So what do you do with the either the indigenous guy or the guy like me who is coming in, just planting a church, now is being introduced to SBC or even, Send Network, and it's like, I don't know anybody.
Yes.
Right? I don't know anybody in this area, in this network. How would you kind of use borrowed credibility in that sense?
Yeah, and that is a challenge. I think the dynamic and the environment for fundraising and church planting has changed. Even it's changed in 5 years since we started. I think there's a lot of reasons I think it's changed. One of the reasons I think is because the Send Network has done such a phenomenal job of mobilizing church to get behind church plants. But for guys that we have a guy that's coming to our city this spring. He has led multiplying ministry in the past. He's a campus pastor for a great church in Vegas, originally from Los Angeles, but he's not indigenous to our network. He doesn't know a lot of guys. He's not buried, but he's been within the organization, a very large organization in Vegas for years, and has done phenomenal ministry, but he just doesn't know other pastors. And so for us, we see this guy as being a guy who we believe in, we trust in, we want to double down. And I was just having a conversation even today where we said, you know what, we know some other churches that we believe will get behind a guy like this, so we're going to vouch for him. He's not pitching on his credibility. He's pitching on our credibility to bring these guys to the table, because we believe once they get in the room with a guy like that, they'll see what we've already seen.
That's it.
And so for guys like that, I think the beauty of the network that we have, the family that we have, is that we can raise funds for each other in these scenarios, in these situations. The kingdom of God is bigger than my little small piece.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Okay, so that's the credibility side. Let's talk more about vision. Let's drill down a little bit there. When you said that vision is not something you can borrow. Vision is something that has to come from within. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, vision has to be specific to our context. And I think donors know when you've done the work of the missionary.
Yeah, that's good.
They know when you've done the work of a missionary. They know when you understand your context. And I think our ability to cast vision oftentimes is limited by our ability to see what God wants to happen in our city.
Okay.
And so when we are acquiring vision, you understand there's several elements to vision, and that's acquiring the vision and then casting the vision. But acquiring the vision is doing the work of a missionary. It's understanding the city like a spiritual anthropologist.
Yeah.
I heard a friend and a mentor, you and I both know him, out of Kansas City. He was describing the work of a missionary like this. He said, you can see the city through a lot of different eyes. He said, you can see the city through the eyes of a taxi driver. Mm-hmm. The taxi driver will see the problems. You can see the eyes. You can see the city through the eyes of a longtime resident. They'll see the problems in the city. They want to know the solutions. You can see the eyes. You can see the city through the eyes of a tourist who has no clue what the problems of the city are. Mm-hmm. Or you can see the city through the eyes of a cartographer. This was his words. Cartographer is the one that draws the lines. They know where the neighborhoods are. They know what's happening.
I'm so glad you explained. I was like, what is a cartographer? Yeah, I was like, I didn't know what a cartographer
He draws the maps.
You got to use smaller words as we talk, but go ahead.
I'm with you. And so in acquiring vision, doing the work of a missionary, I think our ability to acquire that vision is only limited by our ability to see the city as God sees the city.
That's good.
And that work doesn't come easy. And the reason why I say you can't borrow somebody else's vision, in church planting, it's easy to grab a prospectus from Kansas City. You got a buddy that's killing it in Miami. Hey man, can I grab your prospectus? And we just cut and paste vision, and we begin to cast vision. But vision is really specific to your context. My context is the entertainment industry. 80% of my people are struggling with the idol of significance, struggling with the idol of control. I need to know my context, how I can speak the gospel to my context. And so as I cast vision, donors know if you have done the work of a missionary. And so that's an important piece to it.
Yeah, oftentimes I hear people, our church planners, going into a city, and a lot of times they don't have vision, they have more anti-vision, right? They have, it's more of what we're not gonna be and what's wrong with the city already, and what's, how important is that when it comes to raising funds, that people are not leading out with necessarily anti-vision, but with vision? Or do you differentiate the two?
Yeah, no, I understand. I think I understand, and for sure. I do see that. I do see guys speak about their city in terms of what's wrong and the problems and the issues, and of course the gospel is the solution to all of those things. Right. But I think vision is most compelling, not from the negative. It's always compelling from the positive. Yeah. What God is going to do, what God can do, what God is already doing, and so in terms of speaking of the positive. A lot of times in fundraising, I don't know if mistake is the right word, but oftentimes we approach the fundraising moment by saying, hey, my city's got 100,000, 98% are lost, all the statistics. And those aren't the compelling things that a donor wants to hear. The donor wants to hear the stories. I mean, Nehemiah had a story before he went to the king. He had a passion before he went to the king. And as we describe the context of our city, in my opinion, I had a preaching professor years ago that said you can preach it from the positive or you can preach it from the negative. And preaching from the positive is always more compelling. And so I think it's the same is true in fundraising.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So let's get to some practical things, right?
Sure.
I got the credibility, or I'm borrowing yours because I need to borrow yours, right? I got the credibility. I got the vision. Now what? What do I need to go do? What are some practical steps that you tell a person to go out and do?
I think most guys start here. Most guys say, okay, I'm going to the biggest church, the largest church, the church that's the most well-known. Obviously, they're large. They've got a lot of influence, so they must have a lot of money. I hear guys all the time say, hey, I'm going to mail a letter I'm going to contact XYZ church. And they look up the top, Tom Rainer's top 500 churches. They're sending letters to the top 10 and putting all of their chips in that. The reality is those churches operate on a different scale. Yeah. They operate relationally. They're going to fund guys they already are in a relationship with. And so I tell guys all the time, don't start with the large churches. You're not going to find a whole lot of low-hanging fruit but in those environments. Start with building a list. We started literally with a spreadsheet. And we put, I think it was over 600 churches we wrote down, names of the pastor, address of the pastor. We probably didn't know a significant percentage of those. That's why the credibility piece was important, borrowing it from somebody. And so you got to start with who's within my sphere of influence. And that sphere of influence grows as you begin to borrow credibility. And so as you begin to make that list, and you have to decide, how am I going to contact these people? For us, we wrote 3 letters, one from us, one from our pastor, had a list of references, and literally mailed it out, hand addressed every single one of them to 600 and something churches, and got a response back from, I don't know, but a lot.
Yeah. Let's just say you got a response back from about those, like 200 of the 600.
Yeah, not even close to that,
right.
But yeah.
But what's the goal from that? Like, are you trying to get a face-to-face, or
yes.
is it a phone call?
Absolutely.
Like, what are you trying to do?
So in the letter, I said, I know your time is valuable. I'm confident you're getting these every week. And so I don't want to waste your time. If you could just give me 10 minutes of your time, I'd love to talk to you about what I believe God's going to do in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And so I would follow up. I knew everybody that we had mailed, and I had an email list as well. So I followed up by email about 10 days later with every single church that we mailed to, and said the same thing. Hey, I know your time's valuable. I sent you a letter. I hope you got it. I would just love 10 minutes of your time on the phone. And I felt like if I could get on the phone with a potential partner, I believe we had a great chance of raising funds. And so, I hear of a lot of guys, there's a million different ways to raise funds, but I hear of a lot of guys that are flying everywhere around the country to raise funds. We raised funds literally, from mailing letters, all but maybe 1 or 2 partners we actually visited. And I think we ended up with like 58 church partners that funded and bought into what God wanted to do. There's a million different ways to do it. That was just how we did it.
Yeah. So you basically, is it a Zoom call, a face-to-face, or just literally a phone call, and that's how you did most of your interaction?
It was a 10, 15-minute phone call.
Phone call, yeah.
And let me tell you why that could have happened. It wasn't my credibility. You can borrow credibility. Right. And I think our ability to raise funds is limited probably by the lower of the two. If my credibility is 9 because I've got a Johnny Hunt that's recommending me, but my vision is a 4, I'm not going to raise level 9 capacity of funds. I'm going to be somewhere in between. But credibility can raise it. And so I felt like the door's open. We call it a gatekeeper. The door's open because someone else vouched for us. And so they already had this implicit belief that something is happening here. That's why the credibility piece is so important.
And I think that's critical. One final question, like if there's this one thing that you would just tell people, like, hey, I'm a church planner coming into a city, I need to raise money, what would be that one thing that you would just make sure you do this?
Yeah. Well, I would probably gravitate towards doing the work of a missionary first.
Yeah. So be the real thing.
That's right.
Do the work of a missionary, because people can tell
That's
what
right.
they're doing.
And I'll give you a great example, Dhati. I emceed the Los Angeles assessment. I do that every year. And last fall, I met a guy named Jacob, church planner out of Fresno. Never met him in my life. Wouldn't know him. Probably would never cross paths ever. And as I listened to Jacob tell his story, Jacob's a guy who came out of drugs, crime, poverty situation. Jacob knew who he was. Jacob knew who he was reaching. And Jacob was extremely passionate about it. And I'd never met Jacob in my life, but I saw him for 3 minutes on a stage, explain his passion, know who he was reaching. And I said, I don't need to know anything else. I'm going to support this guy. Yeah. And our church is going to support him. Yeah. And so, you know, I do the work for missionary. Know your context, love your city. And I think it really begins there.
That's good. Well, I always say that I believe that authenticity is the apologetic of our day. And just people need to know, are you really bought in? Are you genuine and are you sincere about what God has both deposited in you and that he can do through you? And so, man, thanks for taking some time out and kicking it with me.
Awesome. Enjoyed it.
You have been listening to We Are Sin Network, a resource of the North American Mission Board. For more information about today's podcast and other relevant resources, visit sendnetwork.com.